Well, this is the 7th beatitude. There are 8 beatitudes that Jesus gives us. This is number 7. This is the 7th of the 8 beatitudes. Okay, and we've talked about some sort of categories of beatitude already. The root, shoot and fruit, haven't we? And we thought about the monkey bars, as it were. But there's another category, okay? Character and experience. The first 7 beatitudes describe the Christian character. Okay? The 8th beatitude describes the experience of a Christian. Okay? A disciple of Jesus. Okay, so one is about character. We're hopefully meek and we weep over sin. We're peacemakers. We're pursuing purity of heart and all those things. But the 8th one is those who are persecuted. A Christian will be persecuted. And this morning, as we think about peacemakers, it's important to remember that yes, we're to be peacemakers, but we will never achieve complete peace. Because what is the 8th beatitude? Blessed are those who persecute you. So immediately, it sends a signal to us, doesn't it? That although we can be peacemakers, our experience living in this world, if we live for God, we can expect to be difficult, at least at times. Now, of these characters, it's easy to be persecuted, isn't it? In a sense. You've only got to upset people, or be, a really godly Christian, and you'll probably get persecuted somewhere along the line. And but this 7th beatitude, blessed are the peacemakers, is the hardest of all. Okay, remember we've got the monkey bars, and it begins easy, relatively easy. So the first monkey bar, where we begin this journey of faith, is blessed are those who are poor in spirit. We can all relate to that, can't we? Poverty of spirit. When it comes to being spiritual and impressing God with all that I've got, actually I've got nothing. I'm like a spiritual hobo when it comes to God. That's the reality. And we realise that, but the more we see of God, the more we realise, really, I've got nothing to impress Him with. I've got a whole load of stuff that will sadden Him, and that when I see it from His perspective, saddens me. And that's why that then leads to the mourning. You see, one leads to another. But what we can't do is skip out 1, 2, 3, 4 and leap to pure of heart. Yeah, as we said, none of us would begin by saying, well, we'd all say, I'm poor of spirit, but how many of us would say, I'm pure of heart? That's a hard one, isn't it? Isn't it? We have to, we arrive there as we go through Beatitudes. But even harder than pure of heart is blessed are the peacemakers, being a peacemaker. It is the hardest of challenges. If you're someone that sees a mountain and thinks, I want to get to the top of that just because it's there, then this is for you. But if you're the kind of person that, that doesn't really like that kind of a challenge, and when you see something that's really hard and difficult, you kind of shy away. In our nature, we tend to respond differently to things. The thing is this is for you as well. Okay, this is for all of us, no matter what our natural responses are. This is the hardest of all. We're going to begin by looking at Psalm 55. Look at what it says. You notice from verse 11, destructive forces are at work in the city. Threats and lies never leave its streets. For it is not an enemy who taunts me, then I could bear it. It is not an adversary who deals insolently with me, then I could hide from it. But it is you, a man, my equal, my companion, my familiar friend. We live in a world, as I was praying earlier, that's torn apart by division and strife. And there's strife in the world because there's strife in the city. And there's strife in the city because there's strife in the inhabitants of the city, in the families, isn't it? You look around, strife in families. There's strife in families and turmoil because there's strife and turmoil in our own hearts. That's the reality. Remember, the peacemaker unfolds, as it were, from blessed are the pure in spirit. Divided hearts lead to chaos and trouble. And King David wrote this psalm. And if we're going to deal with being peacemakers, we need to go to the heart of the issue. And look at what he says, verse 11 again. Destructive forces are at work in the city. What city is he talking about? He's talking about the city of David. Jerusalem. God's city. He's not talking about enemies that are coming from outside into the city. He's talking about his own people. In fact, look at what he goes on to say. Verse 14. We used to take sweet counsel together. Within God's house we walked, it says, in the strong. So there's division and strife everywhere. And for many of us, all of us will know in some way the betrayal of a close friend. Someone that shouldn't have betrayed us. A family member, just like David was speaking. Perhaps it's a work colleague. Probably not the case for many of us, but a friend of mine, a guy called David Harland, he's a pastor over in Port Said. He had a business partner. They were like millionaires, great business. His business partner completely ripped him off, committed fraud, and he got left in the lurch. Guy he had been close friends with for years. Betrayal. People that you grew up with. Sometimes it happens in the church. People that should know better really hurt us at times and cause division. Sometimes the kind of division and strife is just the everyday, daily strife that can build up and cause resentment and all kinds of things. The betrayal of a pastor. I've told you the story before about the church that I know of over in Lancing, and one in Worthing as well, where the pastor for 2 years was committing adultery, preaching every week. I remember sitting under his ministry thinking, this is a gifted man. At that time, Lancing Tab, they had the throngs coming in. There was like, if you've been to Lancing, you'll know, they can fit maybe 180 uncomfortably. They used to cram 300 in there in an evening. Absolutely rammed all the time for 2 years, committing adultery with a vulnerable young girl that they had taken in. Terrible. And you can imagine the devastation. Contention, division and strife are realities of life. And Jesus calls us to be peacemakers. Here's a quote from Thomas Watson. Thomas Watson is absolutely brilliant. If you want to, most of what I get comes from Thomas Watson for the Beatitude. So if you've been impressed at all with anything, okay, get his book, read it. It is brilliant. Easy to read, very good. But this is what he says. Satan, look at this, think about this. Satan kindles the fire of contention in men's hearts and then stands and warms himself by the fire. What a picture that is, isn't it? That's something to stay with us, days. Every time we find ourselves becoming contentious and division and strife and all of that, to remember, Satan kindles a fire in men's hearts and then warms himself. Let's not give him that pleasure. He fans into flame strife, division, resentment, hurt, pain, anger, betrayal. He loves most of all the bitterest of betrayal. Fans it into a flame and then warms himself. And then, with that picture in mind, let's remember that Jesus left the glory of heaven and came into a divided, war-torn, troubled world. And his coming came with the announcement of angels. Glory to God, Luke chapter 1 verse 14. Glory to God in the highest, and on earth, peace. You see, Jesus coming changes things. He has the power to change things. He has the power to bring about what we cannot and what we certainly do not. Peace among those with whom he is pleased. So we are called to be peacemakers. This is the first heading really for us, the first main heading. Peace. We're going to look at one verse, 1 Corinthians chapter 7, from verse 15. And by the way, we're following the pattern that we followed with the last beatitude. This week we're thinking about the theory. There's plenty to feed us in the theory, but the next time I preach we'll be looking at the practicalities. Okay? So there's lots of practical stuff to come. It's more theory persuading us of the need to give this our attention, to deal with it. So 1 Corinthians chapter 7 and verse 15. What's up there? Very simply, God has called you to peace. So we're called in this world to be peacemakers. He's called you to peace. It's good, isn't it, to have a very simple statement like that, because there's nothing unclear about that, is there? People often wonder, what am I called to? Okay, and they're wondering if their gifting and calling is this and is that. Well, he's told us already, we are called to peace. Don't worry about all the other stuff. If you haven't grown in peace yet, if you haven't yet become a peacemaker, you've got plenty in your plate to be dealing with, right? So don't worry about becoming a missionary here or there or whatever. Maybe the Lord will have you do that, that's fine. But if you're not sure about those things, you don't need to be. What you do need to be clear on is you are called to peace. You have been called to peace. That means, very simply, this. In every situation, in every circumstance that you find yourself in, you are to be someone that brings peace to that situation. Peace in your marriage. How can I be a bringer of peace? Peace in your family. When things go wrong, when things go wrong in the family, we often respond in unhelpful ways, don't we? We say things and pride rises up so quickly, so often. We call it, hurt or anger or pain. Really, it's pride, 100% of the time, almost. And we respond out of that, and that causes more problems and more trouble. So, but we're called to be bearers of peace and not dissension. In the church, we're called always, always, always to bring peace. But we're called to bring peace in every situation. In the workplace, in the community. So we're all called to contribute peace wherever we go in every circumstance. There is a massive challenge for us. Okay? Straight away. Because a lot of the time we're not peacemakers. Probably, if you're anything like me. Secondly, we must plan for peace. Proverbs chapter 12 and verse 20. Deceit is in the heart of those who devise evil, but those who plan peace have joy. Blessed are the peacemakers. Did you notice that they're those who plan peace? Peace doesn't just happen. Make every effort to maintain the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. But it doesn't just happen, okay? We are to plan for peace. Now, what might that mean? Well, it means this. Wherever you see strife, wherever you see problems, the first response is to think, how can I help this situation? If you've upset someone, or there's some sort of conflict that you're involved in, you need to plan carefully. And when you plan, it's not how do I win this argument? How do I get what I want? That's not the primary thing that we plan for, which so often it can be, can't it? But as representatives of God, we plan for peace. Think through, how can I approach this person? What words can I speak so as not to inflame the situation? We need to think and plan. We need to not take peace for granted. Thinking about our actions in the workplace, in the family, in the marriage, in whatever situations and circumstances we're in the school situation, whatever. We need to think, how my actions in the church affect other people? And be responsible and think and plan. If I do this, is it going to disrupt peace? Is there something better or a better way that I can do it? Because very often when we know that our actions are going to cause disruption, we, rather than think and plan and deal with it with people, we just do what we do and try and not face up to it and speak about it and hope it just sort of doesn't get mentioned or forgotten. That's a natural response for us, isn't it? Do you recognise that? Okay? But no, plan for peace. Okay. What can I do to rebuild relationships? How do I articulate my words? We need to watch our own hearts as we deal with conflict and trouble and strife. Because when we find ourselves in conflict, the first thing that gets shaken up is our hearts, usually. And for as long as our hearts are unsettled and are not at peace, we will not be able to bring peace. So that's the second thing. We're called to peace. We must plan for peace. Now, just think about this for a moment before I move on to the next thing. With all the other beatitudes, that's a lot, isn't it? We've got a lot on our plate as Christians. I mean, doesn't it seem like too much when you think about all the different facets of things that we've got to remember and put into practice and all the different areas of life? Doesn't it seem like too much? Doesn't it? And when we think about that, it begins to make sense what Jesus said when he said, pick up your cross. And what Paul said, I crucify my body daily. In other words, it is too much if we're trying to live two lives. We can't fit the new Christian life into our old life. It doesn't work like that. A death has to take place in order to make room for a whole new life. Complete, total overhaul of our life, of ourselves, of everything about us. This touches on a doctrine known as total depravity. And what that means is every part, it doesn't mean say that we're completely depraved and not able to do anything good. You know, you can help an old lady across the road, and we can give money to charity, and we can be friendly, we can do all of that. That's common grace, partly. But what total depravity means is that we are incapable of doing anything with that is pure and right, with pure right motives. Every part of our being has become corrupt. So although we can still do things, we're a mixture as we do them. And so we need a complete and total overhaul. So, we're called to peace. We're to plan for peace. And thirdly, we are to work for peace. Hebrews chapter 12 and verse 14. Strive for peace, everyone, and for the holiness without which no one will see the Lord. Do you see peace and holiness, purity of heart, peace? Those two coming together again. But that word strive. Again, we're big on grace, right? There is nothing that we can do towards our salvation. Okay? Absolutely nothing. He has done it all. Remember we thought about that a few weeks ago. We have been justified. That is a done deed if we put our trust in Jesus. We have been reconciled, brought into a relationship of love and peace with God, so that He is never ever against us. No matter what He does, no matter what we do, He will always work for our good, even when it's painful for us. He's never angry with us. All of His anger was poured out upon Jesus. So He disciplines us because He loves us. And He blesses us because He loves us. Because we have been reconciled. We're in that friendship relationship with God, even when we mistreat Him. But, really the Beatitudes are talking largely about sanctification. About us growing in holiness. And there we mustn't confuse God's grace in our salvation and reconciliation with the work that we have to do with sanctification, to become more like Him. Okay? One person put it like this: salvation costs us nothing, discipleship costs us, anyone know? Everything. And that is spot on. Salvation costs us everything. So we mustn't be, as Christians, in our love of that, confuse it and be work shy when it comes to the things that we're called to do. Like called to peace, there's work to be done. That's why he says, strive for peace. You know, there's that sense of straining at the oars, knuckles white, working hard. There's effort involved. It's not easy, it requires perseverance and perseverance and perseverance. That's why there's another doctrine, the perseverance of the saints. If it was easy, there would be no need for perseverance. Remember, this is the last rung of the monkey bars. The hardest one. It's not easy. Okay? There's work to be done. Make every effort to keep the unity. Just try and ignore them because they're probably not going to go away. Try not to have a heart attack. Make every effort to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Every effort is required. Okay, so now we're going to move on. What is a peacemaker? And this is why it's so important. A peacemaker is a person who brings peace to others because they have peace in themselves. Again, this is why we have to go back to those monkey bars. Purity of heart. Remember? An undivided heart. Remember we learned about that? If we love this, and we love that, and we want this, and we want that, and we can't say no to that because we want to say yes to this, or we can't say, and we've not learned to say no to ourselves spiritually, and to be a people of one thing, one Lord, one God, one faith, one Father, one church, one people, one goal. As Rastas would say, one love. But it's true, isn't it? They got it wrong, but we got it right. We're a people of one thing. And for as long as we're struggling at the monkey bars with that purity of heart, that single-mindedness, then we'll never have peace to give. Whatever is in you, when you bump into someone, that is what's going to spill out of you. Okay? And so if we find we don't have peace, we need to go back to that purity issue. How do we get peace? James chapter 4, this is continuing in the same vein really. Look at what he says. There's James chapter 4, verse 1. What causes quarrels, fights and quarrels among you? Don't they come from your desires that battle within you? But look at chapter 3. If you've got a Bible, I think it might be on the screen actually, I can't remember. James chapter 3, verses 17 and 18. He says, but the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all pure, then peace-loving, considerate, submissive, full of mercy and good fruit, impartial and sincere. Verse 18, peacemakers who sow in peace reap a harvest of righteousness. Now did you notice there in verse 17? But the wisdom that comes from heaven is first of all, there's an order, first of all pure. James chapter 1, verse 5. If any of you lacks wisdom, let him ask God, who gives generously to all without reproach, and it will be given him. But let him ask in faith, with no doubting, for the one who doubts is like a wave of the sea that is driven and tossed by the wind. For that person must not suppose that he will receive anything from the Lord. He is, here it is, double-minded, a double-minded man, unstable in all his ways. Now, sometimes we meet people like this, don't we? They're pursuing this and they're pursuing that, and they've got this project on the go, and they've learned something here, they've sold that car, and then they've got this one, and they're kind of the sort of people that they never build in life, do you know? they're always getting stuff, always getting things, even relationships, but they're never building anything. You know, one way that translates in the church is the people that they just go from church to church. They don't build relationships, they don't grow. And the question, I've not done it yet, but I really want to ask one of these people this question. I may have told you this before. If not, you need to hear this because you want to ask someone this question. If you know someone that just hops from one church to another, doesn't put down roots, next time you see them, ask them this: which church are you leaving now? Okay, that's a good question to ask, isn't it? Which church are you leaving? Let us send a signal. Which church are you leaving now? People who are divided, conflicted within, cannot attain peace, cannot become peacemakers. But peacemakers, those who do attain purity of heart, remember, again, we're not talking about perfection, but essentially not being a mixture anymore. We've resolved the Lord above everyone. In 1 Kings chapter 18, verse 21, listen to what Elijah says to the people when it comes to God and Baal. And Elijah came near to all the people and said, "How long will you go limping between two different opinions? If the Lord is God, follow him, but if Baal, then follow him." And the people did not answer. Isn't that interesting? If I was to ask you, maybe if there's certain things in your life, look, that's not really compatible with really following Jesus. If you want to follow God, Jesus is God, follow him. If you're going to follow that, pursue that. I wonder how you would answer. Oh, well, because remember, the double-minded person cannot say no to himself on those things. They can't say no. And that was the case there. But we have to make a choice if we're going to be pure in heart. Isaiah chapter 57, verse 21 says this: "There is no peace, says my God, for the wicked." Why? Because they're full of turmoil and strife. Now, as we draw to a close, it's important for us to all be aware that we will never, any of us, in our pursuit of peace, completely attain it. I've already mentioned, I gave you one reason, persecution, but even in our own lives, there's always a battle to be had. And so I want to share with you 3 things that will help us to be balanced. Because here's what happens either. We think, becoming a peacemaker, it's far too hard and we can just give up. Or we become deluded and think, oh yeah, I've attained it, and actually we're just deluded. Or we can become despondent and lose heart. Colin Smith, another guy that was inspired me with these beatitudes, he talks about a guy who wrote a little book, a man called Bishop Hanby Moore, about holiness. Okay? And this guy gives 3 things that are really helpful to remember. The first is aims. Okay? Oh, aim, there you go, all 3 of them. Aims, limits and possibilities. Aims. That is to say, what is our aim? What are our aims? When you look at the Beatitudes and you think realistically, what can I really achieve? Yeah? You know, if I'm going to get real about this, what can I actually achieve? What he says is our aims must always be the highest. We want to be like Christ. Now we know that to a man, it will be a sinner who walks with God, right? Everyone, when we pass through those pearly gates, sinners pass through those pearly gates. And only then will we be made perfectly righteous and be given resurrection bodies. Okay? But nevertheless, our aim must be nothing less than to be like Jesus. No compromise in the aims. Okay, that's the first thing. The second thing is limits. Recognising that though that is our aim, there will be limitations. Limitations because of the world that we live in. Limitations because we know that it will be a sinner who enters the gates of glory. We know that. So there are limitations. And so we just need to be realistic about that. And possibilities. He says a good prayer to pray is this: Lord God, I want to be as pure and holy and as much a peacemaker as it is possible for a saint this side of heaven to be. Okay? Aims. The highest limits. We realise there are limitations, but possibilities. We can be far more holy, far more peaceful. We can be ministers of peace far more than perhaps we imagine. Paul writes, Romans chapter 12 verse 18, if possible, so far as it depends upon you, live at peace with all men. And then the last heading, why are peacemakers called sons of God? Well, you may be able to work this out without any help from me. God himself is a God of peace. That is the God that we are to represent in the world. He is a God of peace. We're not going to look at all the verses just because of time, but Hebrews 13:20, 1 Thessalonians 5:23, Romans 15 verse 33, he is called a God of peace, the God of peace. In John chapter 17, when Jesus prays his last high priestly prayer that we know of at least, the night he was betrayed, when he did that last evening with the disciples, listen to what he prays. He says, Father, the hour has come. This is chapter 17 verse 1. Father, the hour has come. Glorify your Son, that your Son may glorify you. Since you have given him authority over all flesh to give eternal life to all whom you have given him. And this is eternal life, that they may know you, the only true God, and Jesus Christ whom you have sent. I glorified you on earth, having accomplished the work that you gave me to do. And now, Father, glorify me in your presence with the glory that I had with you before the world existed. Now he says there, firstly, that he glorified his Father. He's already glorified him by completing the works that God gave him to do, right? And we know about that. We look at the Gospels, we see an amazing life of miracles and teaching and compassion and wisdom and grace. We see the glory of God, don't we, in the ministry of Jesus. Very clear. And he's completed that and glorified him. But he says, but now, having glorified you to that degree, now glorify me in your presence with the glory I had with you before the world began. In other words, now reveal the eternal, infinite glory of God. Far greater than his earthly ministry could reveal. And God answered that prayer by Jesus' death on the cross. And just think about this. The supreme glory of God is revealed in Jesus hanging on a cross. Why is this? Well, what was he doing on the cross? He was reconciling man and God, bringing peace. That's what he was doing. God is a peacemaker. He came into this world for that very purpose. And we are called to be peacemakers. And when we reflect on the cost of being a peacemaker to Jesus, then that's a signal to us that this is not easy. It's not going to be easy for us. There is always cost involved. The cost of bearing the brunt of other people's sin. That's what Jesus did. The cost of not taking revenge and reacting and hurting. This is what peacemakers do. They bring peace. You want to be a son of God, a child of God, you must be a peacemaker. You want to be a peacemaker, you must resolve in your heart that Jesus is Lord, your Lord. Purity of